So today, Omar, we're going to talk about operator overloading. Okay. So let's suppose we have let's say we have what? Let's say here we have a class, and this class is called counter, and inside this class I have a private data. Because of this minus, you know this. Because of this minus, we call it private. This is like by convention. It's called current value, and it's of type integer. And we have also some public methods in order to manipulate this data. We have a counter, which is the default constructor. We have another constructor, which is a general constructor, which take integer here to initialize this one. We have add counters. As you can see, it takes a counter, and it returns a counter. We have get counter in order to return the value of the private data, and we have increment counter in order to add 1 to this data. So let's first implement this and then remove this add counter and remove this increment counter. And instead of having these functions, why we don't have something like this? Counter 1 plus counter 2 directly. Why we don't have something like this? Plus plus, for example, counter 1, which means that add 1 to counter 1, or add 1 to counter 2, or add 1 to whatever counter we want. So let's start. So first of all, we need to include and create a class. So I'm gonna include. I don't want to waste your time. I know how to do this. Include that. I know that you know how to do this. Include IOStream, class counter, and the private, the current value, the value that we have said we're gonna include it here, and this is the current value. And after that, actually, let's create the public values. And if you remember, I need a general constructor and a default constructor, and I need also a get counter. So I have already done this. So let me do it again here. So a public here, I have a counter, the default constructor, I'm initializing the current value to 0. I have also a general constructor, I'm sending a value here, and I'm storing this value in the current value, and I have a get counter, which is going to return the private data here. Okay, so I'm done with, let's go back here. I'm done with this one, I'm done with this one, and I'm done with this one. Let's start now with add counters. As you can see, it's going to take a counter. So it's going to take an object of type counter, and it's going to return an object. And what does this mean? It means that whenever I call add counters, let's if I say, for example, C1 counter 1 dot add counter, I'm adding C1 dot add counter, and I'm sending to it C2. What's going to happen? It's going to add the value of the current value of C2 to the current value of C1, and it's going to return for me a counter, which is C3, for example. That's what it does. So let's go here and start writing this add counter. So it's going to return a counter, okay? And the name is add counter, and it's going to take a counter. And let's name this counter as C1. So what's going to happen when I call this function? It's going to return for me. So it's going to return a counter. And I'm going to initialize this counter with what? With the current value of the counter who's calling this function. So the current value is inside the current value. Plus, I'm going to add the value of C1. Sorry, so whatever inside C1 dot, how to get the value of the current value inside the object C1, as you can see, it's C1 dot get counter. So what I'm doing here actually is that whenever I call add counter, what's going to happen is going to return a counter for me, and the value of this counter is going to be the current value of the called object plus the value of C1. Do you want to test it? Let me test this one just to make sure. So let me end this class here and let me test it for you. So int main, let's say, int main, and let's actually create two counters. So counter C1 is let's say C1, and inside this C1 let me 10, not so C1 10, and counter C2, and let's say it's 30, and let's say this C1. It doesn't matter, but let's say this C1. And now I want you, for example, to have counter C3, and then say, let's say C1 dot add. You remember this add counter? So I'm adding C1 to C2. Okay, so when I'm calling this function, adding these two functions, if you remember, is going to return another variable, another object of type counter. So I can store it in C3. So C3 is equal to C1 dot add counter. So I have stored it there. Okay, now what do I want? I want to print what's inside C3. How to print it? Cout C3 dot get counter and return 0. So let's see what's gonna happen. I'm gonna save and let me here compile it and let me run it. So when I run it, I got 40. From where did I got this 40? Remember, I have added C1 to C2. When I call this function, I'm sending C2. So instead of C1 here, I'm having C2, and the one who's calling is C1. So current value will be the value of C1. Okay, so the current value is the value of C1. C1 dot get counter is gonna give me the value of C2 in this case, which is 30. So I'm gonna add 10 to 30, and the answer is going to be like, I'm gonna create another object of type counter, I'm gonna return it, I'm gonna store it in C3. Now whenever I print C3, it's gonna print for me 40. As you can see, it's 40. So it's clear, it's not a big deal, it's clear. What if now I want to write something else? I don't want actually to write this, I want to make it like look natural, look something that we have dealt with it in our whole life. So what does it mean? It means something like this. What if I want C3 to be equal to C1 plus C2? Okay, something like this. If I write something like this, you're gonna notice that immediately I'm having an error here, and this error, it says that this plus does not match it. Actually, plus it can add, let's say, integer with integer, double with double. We have overloaded it actually to add string with string, but to add something of type counter doesn't know actually how to add it. So can we solve this problem? Yes. How? Using something called operator overloading. So let's start writing our first operator overloading. So we're gonna get rid of this error. Remember, I have an error here and I need to get rid of it. So how to do this? In order to do this, all what we need to do is, so this plus, when you write C1 plus C2, it's the same as writing something like this, operator plus, and you're sending to this operator plus an object of type counter. You're sending to it an object of type counter. So this plus is a function. The one who's calling the plus is the one in the left side, and the one that is passing to it as an argument is the one which is in the right hand side. Okay, so I have left hand side and right hand side. So as if I'm saying that C1 dot operator and sending to it C2. It's the same thing. So remember this. So let's go back here. So since plus, I can deal with it as an plus is a function called operator plus. Function is gonna return something to me. In this case, it's gonna return for me a counter. It's gonna return a counter for me. And what is the name of the function? It's operator plus. So look, I have a list of operators here that I can overload. One of them is called operator plus. And this operator plus, I'm gonna send to it Again, another counter. Let's say I'm sending to it just a reference to this counter, and let me name it as C1. Okay, so when I call this operator and I send it to it, what's gonna happen? All what I need is to add the current values of these two objects and then return an object, and this object should contain the new value. Sorry. So what I'm gonna do is integer, let's say a new value, and this new value is equal to the current value. And when I say current value, it means that the value of the object that I'm gonna call the operator plus, which is going to be on the left-hand side, remember, plus the value of C1, the current value of C1, which is C1 dot get counter. As simple as that. Okay, so what I have done here, I have created a new operator. Why is giving me here error? Let me check. C1 dot get operator. So it's giving me an error. Yes, the error has like gone, but I still need one step. What is this step? This step actually is the counter. Do I have return here? No, I don't have return. So what should I do? I should say return, and in this case, I'm gonna return a counter, and inside this counter, I'm gonna have my new value. Okay. So return a counter, which is correct because it's of type counter, and a new value. So you would ask me, can I, for example, create a temporary counter here, a counter temp, and then inside this temporary counter, temporarily counter, I give this new value to temporarily counter and then return it? Yes, you can do this, but you have to have a function like set to set the new value. Okay, we don't have it, so that's why I'm creating it directly. And then, so now let's go back here. You remember the error that we had here? What happened to the error? I don't have such error anymore. Why? Because actually I told my class counter, I have a new method for you, the plus. Don't treat the plus as a usual plus, treat it in this way. Whenever an object of my type, which is counter, whenever an object of my type, I'm adding it to another object of my type, please create a new value, add the current value of the object who's calling on the left-hand side to the one on the right-hand side, and return for me a new counter that hold the new value. Got it? So now let's see. Okay, let me forget about this one, and let's print the answer of this one. Remember, before it was 40. Let's see, let me save it first, and trust me, I'm saving it, and let me compile it, and no errors, and let me run it. I got again 40. So what I have done, I have overloaded this plus. What does it mean, overloading? Don't treat plus as if I'm adding two numbers or two strings. I'm adding now two objects, these two objects of type counter. So since C++ doesn't know anything about this type, because I have defined this type, so I have to define my plus. So I have defined it, and it's very easy. Counter operator plus, and we're done. So now if we go back here, you can see we're done with this one. What about the increment? Can I do anything regarding the increment? So as you can see, the increment is a function, a public function also, and its return type is void, and it's called increment. So let's do it in the simple way, the one that without any overloading. So what do I have? I have function called increment. It returns nothing. It's called increment counter. increment counter, and it's gonna take nothing. And what's gonna happen when I call this function? All what's gonna happen is the current value is going to be plus plus incremented by 1. That's it. So now let's go back here, and I have printed the sum of these two end line. Let me increment now C3. So C3 dot, you see I have this increment counter. And let me again print Cout C3 after incrementation is, so C3 dot get counter, again end line. So let's save it, and let's again let me clear this for you. Let me again compile it, and I got an error. What is the error? Get counter end line. So C3 dot get counter, oh, this one here, end line. So let me save it again, and let me again clear this for you, and let me compile it, and let me run it. And as you can see, I have 40, and C3 after incrementation is 41. So let's say, Omar, you don't want actually to call this, you want it to look like natural, and you want to write something like this, plus C3. As you can see, I got an error. And what is this error? It says that plus plus matches these operand types are, so I don't have this plus plus inside counter. If you're talking about integer and you say plus plus, I can understand it, but plus plus C3 and C3 of type counter, I don't understand. You need to give me more instruction. In order to do this, again, the same idea that we have done, I'm gonna do it here. The same idea. So what I'm gonna do, I'm gonna remember, let's go back to this increment that we have. It's gonna return void. Again, I'm gonna write void as if there is nothing at all. Instead of calling this function increment counter, I'm gonna write operator. And what is the operator that I'm dealing with now? It's plus plus. So I want to overload the plus plus. Am I going to send anything? No, I'm not going to send anything. So what's gonna happen when I call this plus plus? When I call this plus plus, all what I need is the current value to be equal the current value plus 1. That's all what I need. This plus here is not overloaded. Remember, this plus here is dealing with an integer So this one will not conflict with the plus that we have here. This plus is different. That's why it's called overloading. The plus here is going to add 2 integers. The plus here that we have is going to add 2 objects. And that's the idea of operator overloading. So now I have done this. Let's go back here. Do you think I still have the same error? Remember, I had this underlined red line here. Do I still have it? Or what do you expect? What does this mean? It means that we don't have any error because we have defined the plus plus. Now the counter knows what does it mean plus plus, and it means that go and add 1 to the current value. So let's now. What do you think? I'm gonna move this from here. Control X. I'm gonna move it to here, and now I'm gonna copy this one here. I'm gonna move it to here. And I'm gonna write C3 after, actually this one is incrementation after second incrementation. What's happening after second incrementation? And let's save it. Again, let us compile it. No errors. And let's run it. What do you think? Look at it. After incrementation is 41. So at the beginning it was 40 and then 41. 41 we added these two together, and then 41 the first incrementation, and the second incrementation is 42. So that's how I overload operators. So as you can see, it's very easy, straightforward. Instead of writing it in this ugly way, I can write it in a very nice way. Instead of saying, for example, C3 dot increment, I can just write plus plus C3. That's the whole idea. So now in the next video, we're gonna talk about more advanced type of operators, okay? Study this again.